Good afternoon. We'll give it a second or two to get started here. You can see the count heading up. Spencer, if you want to jump into a share screen, that'd be fine to get the agenda up. About to climb over 100. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We're just getting into the room. Big thanks to all our panelists. You can see them here in the share screen, I think from the user perspective. Yeah, there we go. Look, we crossed over 105. Way to go. All right, well, I'll go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon. I'm Jared Voskel. I serve as Director of Regulatory Affairs for CASA. Thank you so much for joining us today for this SSS WDR webinar. It's been a few years since we've hosted one of these, since the adoption of the reissued order and when it went into effect in June of 2022. Big thanks to all of our panelists, the folks from agencies at Central San, IUA, City of Chino, as well as folks at the Water Board in the Office of Enforcement. This webinar is divided up into two parts. The first is going to include lessons learned from large agencies from updating their sewer system management plans. And there'll be some Q&A afterwards to discuss that. And then the second part's really focused on discussions from the Water Board, both on upcoming deadlines, including the boundary maps, as well as a really in-depth conversation with the Office of Enforcement on what they're looking for with compliance. And so, like I said, we're really grateful and appreciative of all of these folks taking their time to present to us. A couple of housekeeping items, over the course of the afternoon, you can use the Q&A box in Zoom to submit questions. We're going to have Q&A after each presentation, so you can put them in there in real time, and then we'll get to them once we get to those breaks. And then this webinar is going to be recorded and it'll be posted online. So if there's parts that you want to share with colleagues who couldn't join, it'll be ready for that kind of use also as a resource. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mary Cousins from BACWA to introduce our first guest, and hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. Hello, everyone. My name's Mary Cousins with the Bay Area Clean Water Agencies, and I'd really like to welcome three guest speakers to our panel this afternoon on sewer system management plans, or SSMPs, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. But just some background. As most of you probably know, the general order that was reissued by the State Water Board back in late 2022, it continues to require that agencies maintain updated SSMPs as one of the really core requirements for demonstrating compliance with the general order. And, the actual requirements, though, of what goes into your SSMP did change, and also the due dates changed. And May 2nd of this year, this last May, was the due date for large agencies with populations of more than 100,000 to get those SSMPs updated and turned in. And then for agencies that are the next tranche down for populations of 10 to 100,000, that due date is coming up in August 2nd of this year. And after that, we have due dates for the small and very small agencies in 2026. So the purpose of the panel today and the inspiration for it was to really hear from those agencies that have already now completed their SSMP updates to reflect the new reissued general order, and to share their lessons learned with all of you who still may be in the process of updating your SSMPs. So we have three panelists today. The first is Justin Waples from Central Contra Costa Sanitary District, or Central San for short. Their agency just won CWEA Large Collection System of the Year. Justin is a professional engineer, and he currently serves as the collection system lead for Central San's Planning and Applied Research Work Group. And most importantly, Justin also helped lead the development of Central San's last three SSMPs. Next, we have Lucia Diaz. She's with the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, where she's the manager of facilities and water system programs within the O&M division that's responsible for collection systems. And Lucia currently serves on the CWEA Board of Directors, and she's the incoming chair for CASA's collection system work group. And she received this year's CWEA Richard D. Pomeroy Award for collection systems. Finally, we have Keith Martinez joining us from the city of Chino. And he's worked with the city since 2006, and he's currently serving as the Public Works Services Manager. And he worked with a consultant team to update the most recent SSMP audit for the city, and he's currently working with the consultant team to finalize the SSMP update. So we're going to hear from those three panelists live, and then we also have Paul Causey, who is a longtime consultant and emeritus chair of the CASA Collection System Work Group, and who also participated in our negotiations with the State Water Board over this reissued order. And he's going to be assisting us behind the scenes, helping manage the written Q&A. So with that, I'd like to start off the panel and ask kind of each participant. Why don't we start with you, Justin, and then go to Lucia and then Keith? And could you just start by kind of telling us where you are in the SSMP process? Have you already completed your SSMP update, or if not, where are you? And also share if you used a consultant to help you complete the update or not, and if so, how?
Thanks, Mary. Good afternoon, folks. Yes, so we completed our SSMP update in March. Officially, it's on the web and on CWIX. We did not use a consultant. We've did it in-house, I think, since inception when we first had to do SSMP. So we've always kept it in-house. We have the resources to do that. And I guess it took us probably the better part of a year, but we weren't doing it full time. It's just kind of part time. We just want to make sure we got it published before the deadline. So yeah.
Great, thanks. Lucia?
For IUA, we finished our SSMP back in March as well. We had to get it done in time for our board approval. We used a consultant to help us with putting the SSMP together. And we were fortunate enough to be able to use the same consultant that helped us with our audit that was due. So it doing the audit with the same consultant that we did the SSMP really kind of got us ahead and making sure we got our SSMP done at a reasonable time. We don't have the resources currently to support that endeavor, so we had to go outside the agency to help make sure we could get it done in a reasonable amount of time.
Great. And Keith, how about you?
We were in the same boat as Lucia. When I took the position, unfortunately, the individual that was handling the SSMP in prior years had left, and coincidentally is with IUA. However, the emails that were going to him were going to the old email address that he had, so we weren't getting the notification to have it renewed before the new order. I think it was in 2023. And so we missed it by like 2 months, and we got assigned as a new enrollee, which kind of changed a bunch of things for us. So we got the audit done with the assistance of a consultant. We had it uploaded, and now we're in the current position of updating and uploading our update, hopefully in the next 2-3 weeks with the same consultant.
Great. Thanks to all of you. And I think we're going to be able to post links to these SSMPs in a minute into the chat for everyone. Where they're internal right now. So when the general order was updated, the SSMP requirements changed in a couple of key ways. And BACWA actually worked with a consultant team and with stakeholders around the state, many of you here today, also State Water Board staff, to prepare a written guidance document on updating SSMPs. And I think we're going to share that in the chat for everyone. It's on the BACWA website. It's on the State Water Board website as well. So all of you have access to a written document about SSMP changes, but we really want to hear directly from our panel today of what were the significant changes that you had to make to reflect the reissued order. And when I say significant, I don't mean that you just had to change the text of the SSMP. I mean, what were any significant changes that maybe were changes to how your agency actually operates? So there was like a systemic change within your agency to reflect the new requirements. Justin, would you like to go first?
Sure, Mary. So I think overall our previous SSMPs, we saw them as an opportunity not just to meet the bare minimum requirements of the WDR, but also to show what we do and how we do it as a way of publicizing how we manage our infrastructure rather than trying to just kind of hide what we do. So we were already a fair way along in having that information readily available. But the new WDR did certainly ask questions that made us dig deeper into how we manage our programs and what we had available in terms of written documentation for processes and procedures. Thankfully, we had an existing resiliency adaptation plan that we did about 7-8 years ago as part of a comprehensive wastewater management plan project. And that touched on, I think, a lot of the resiliency related themes that were in the new WDR. We didn't really get caught off guard, but it certainly made us think, hey, we've got to keep the pace going here, and there's no quiet spells for us here.
Great, thanks. Lucia, would you like to share?
I would say IUA was pretty much in the same boat as Central SAN. We had a pretty comprehensive SSMP prior to where we had a lot of those key elements that the state wanted to see already incorporated just a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing we did do when we started out was really making sure that the stakeholders within our agency that had key roles within the SSMP were part of the discussion early on.
Mm-hmm.
With our consultant, we basically had a kickoff meeting to make sure, I think one of the biggest things was making sure that we had all the right components to be added in. And if we weren't doing, if there was SOPs that had changed from the last SSMP that we weren't totally in line with, and we've made some efficiencies, we incorporated that into our new SSMP and that we were actually following it. Because being in the operations side, you know, we don't really control what engineering is doing when it comes to working with the contractors and making sure that the contractors are aware of, you know, our spill response and our procedures to that. So making sure they're in compliance. So some of those front end documents, we actually had to make sure engineering had that new spill emergency response plan as part of their kickoff with their contractor. So that was a big change on the engineering side, making sure that they had the most updated documentation there. And then also on the compliance side, that they were also heavily involved working with us on the collection side on the SSMP. So that way we weren't missing any ordinances that had been updated and making sure they were incorporated, because sometimes it's just about the language changing, but what operationally are we doing differently now than we did prior? That is actually what the state wants to see within the document. So we need to make sure whatever we have in the document, what we're practicing, and any changes, we make sure those departments were aware and they're incorporating those changes in their SOPs before we publish the document. We had to really work a little quickly to make sure everybody was on board. So fortunately, we were able to work pretty collaboratively between the different departments and department heads to get that done.
Great, thanks. It sounds like a lot of collaboration was required, and I'm going to ask a follow-up question later about getting input from the operations team, because I know that's also a requirement in the new general order. But before we dig into that, I want to go over to Keith and get his thoughts on any significant changes that are in this new version that they're working on.
Mary, I'm not too sure of when they did the last update of how it was collected the information. I don't know if we went outside. At the time, it wasn't with this division. So a lot of the language in the old one needed to be updated, kind of on the vague side. So we got a little bit more specific in how we do things. I know there were some questions on the SERP or the Spill Emergency Response Plan that we had to kind of key in on. Um, Recently, as of November of 23, the city of Chino passed an ordinance or a policy that states that the city will now be responsible for the lower lateral portion. Up until then, the resident was responsible from house to main. So dealing with that, now it's a new component. How do we do maintenance? How do we do preventative maintenance?
Mm-hmm.
Are we just responding to calls with backups and we just address it then, or are we going through it beforehand and addressing it before we possibly get an SSO? Stuff like of that nature.
Yeah, so not really related to the new general order, more related to changes at your agency.
Correct. And, the state would like to see how we implement that. And we're working with our consultant to somehow tie that in to what we're doing as far as on the operation side.
Mm-hmm.
And then plus, we're very fortunate. We're in an area where we have mutual aid, and mutual aid does help with IUA, for example, who's our neighboring, who is in Chino, but we have a great relationship with, and it does help if we ever have an issue. And we've had issues in the past where we came together and it worked. So it's something to definitely highlight in our SSMP moving forward.
Very good. Yes, I love hearing about that mutual aid program that you guys have going on down there. Since you're talking now, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about how you dealt with the requirement to have operators kind of contribute to the SSMP development? How did you actually do that in your case?
When I met with our consultant, we brought in the lead for the wastewater section, and then he brought in one or two individuals. We only have a crew of, I think at that time, a total of 7. So not much for 30 square miles. So we would bring them in, and then we would discuss how they do things in the field, and then our consultant would either provide information, feedback, or say, "Oh, that's really good. I'm glad you're doing that. We're going to write that down." So boots on the ground, the guys in the field were really instrumental in how we did things and how we can improve.
Great, glad to hear that. Lucia, do you want to talk about how your agency put in operator input?
Well, very similar to what Keith did, we really, for our agency, the operations side actually were the leads on the SSMP with the
Right.
consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had the consultant meet with our boots on the ground staff, come in and meet with all of them. And like Keith, we actually only have 7 on our collections crew for our region. And so they were able to meet with both of the leads and then a few of the actual grade 2 operators that are out in the field and get their feedback and seeing actually what they're doing. We actually had them come out while they were working out in the field to actually get a good viewpoint of operationally how they're doing the work. And that was incorporated because they're like, oh, you guys don't have this portion of what they're doing. Let's incorporate that. Or you've had all these additional efficiencies and dashboards that you're doing. Let's incorporate that into the SSCP to showcase and highlight what you have. So it was very important for the collection staff to be involved in the SSMP because it basically dictates what they're doing.
Yeah, great. Justin, tell us how your agency incorporated this kind of input.
Well, I guess the good thing was that this was my third time around for working on SSMPs, and a lot of the same staff were there, but our operations staff are in a different office in a different location, so I was embedded in their staff at their operations center for the duration of putting the SSMP together. So not only was there physically, we had our meetings there with the supervisors and the manager, going through all the parts of the SSMP elements, making sure they're still doing things the way it's written down, or if they change processes and things like that. So very active. We went to them and make sure we got everything squared away with how they're doing it.
All right, detecting a theme of needing to do a lot of checking that the document matches the way things really happen on the ground. It's great. Justin, while we have you here, I know you talked a little bit about the resiliency planning that you previously did. Could you share a little bit more about climate change resilience planning at Central Sand? Because again, that is a new element that's required in the SSMPs under the reissued general order. How does your agency deal with that requirement?
Well, I can share a few images of our resiliency adaptation plan. I guess the short answer is no one really knows what's coming down the pipe, as they say, but at least we can do is kind of think about what could happen and how we could respond. So if I can share my screen here, just make this larger. Can folks see?
Yeah.
that?
Beautiful. Yep.
So this is from our resiliency adaptation plan we did in our last management plan update, 2017. This was published. So this was kind of from our own interest or concern for trying to keep a pace with the changes that we're seeing in the environment. So this particular image shows sea level rise, potential impact to our northern area of our service area. Shows where we could potentially get flooding around several of our pump stations in the northern sector. That's just one example of one of the things that we did. We started looking at frequency and volume of storm events, and working with published information from reputable sources to try to estimate how the storm events could change in our service area and try and project those influences on our system. Something else that we touched on was the criticality and vulnerability of some of our key collection system assets. And a couple of our locations, this is over near Arinder. This brown straight dashed line that you see going kind of at a 45-degree there, that's what we call one of our tunnels. It's about a mile long, with no manholes in between each end. So it's quite deep. It goes through a hillside, and should it fail, we would be really struggling to do a pump around. So we looked at what we need to do to assess the condition of those assets, and potentially, if we had to do a pump around, what would we do to do that? So we had a number of topics in this document. It is available if anyone wants to take a look on our SSMP. It is an appendix, appendix F of our source system management plan. So it's freely available, and yeah, we were lucky we had this in our pocket already to share. So yeah.
Great, thanks so much. Lucia, do you want to share how your agency dealt with some of these resiliency requirements, maybe climate and extending beyond, as Justin just shared?
Well, for us, we really focused on dealing with we have a lot of siphons within our service area that are quite large, where everyone kind of discharges into us. So we had actually done a condition assessment, which was a goal from our last SSMP, and we had finished before the next one was due. So we actually incorporated that condition assessment for our siphons and showed, where our areas of concern were. We incorporated that as an appendix as well. We also did some flow diagrams in regards to our GIS system and really showing how we're monitoring our system and also the risk factor of our spill areas where we've had spills in the past and monitoring those areas with flow monitoring and level monitoring for areas of concern.
Great. Did you have to address any climate risks down where you are, or I guess you guys are inland enough, it's right in the name.
Yeah, we're fortunate enough to
Okay.
not have to be too concerned, other than waterways.
Yeah, okay. Lucky you, lucky you. Keith, do you want to share what your agency has done on the resiliency front?
Well, in my opinion, I think the most potential impact for climate is flooding. So we get a lot of we have I don't want to use the word hotspots, but we have hotspots that we know that have issues and prone to it. So unfortunately for us, it's beyond a maintenance thing. It's more of an improvement that has to go through CIP to address that. So we are working with our CIP team. We have identified locations and areas that they have on their map to do some possible infrastructure improvements and anything of that nature that we can possibly improve what we're dealing with on usually during the wet season. Your typical spring and summer and fall, not as much of an issue. It's really in that winter months that we get those rains.
So that's very interesting. Tell me more about that coordination, because it sounds like you're at a city. Is the city's stormwater department getting involved with those discussions, or how are you kind of assessing where the flooding is happening?
Well, my 7 sewer guys are stormwater too.
Oh, great.
So,
Okay.
so
All
they're
in-house.
both. So
Okay.
not only do they do lateral repairs and mainline repairs, they also do catch basin inspections and cleanings and all of that, all encompassed into one team. So they're pretty busy. So working with the CIP team, we assist them and saying, hey, these are our trouble areas. Can we identify how we can improve these so that we don't have to continue going to these locations and dealing with possible issues down the road?
Meaning that their system is flowing into your system in those locations where there's water piling up, or what
Well,
do you?
everything I believe flows down to Inland Empire, so they get the brunt of it. They get I think last year we had some pretty harsh rains and they were
February.
almost at capacity.
Yeah, in February, we had with those 4 or 5 days of constant rain that we had here in Southern California, we had a lot of I&I issues. And working with the mutual aid program, working with our member agencies, example of City of Chino, and coordinating some of those concerns, we found some areas of concern that we do have in our TYCIP for future work on our pipelines. That where they have issues of concern that come into our system and where we find areas like, okay, these are areas that we need to address quickly.
So for those agencies that are not so fortunate to have that very integrated operation with a stormwater management team, what do you recommend that they do as they head into an SSMP update? Do they need to be talking to their local stormwater agency, and what kinds of information do they need to be talking about to address the newer and much more rigorous requirements about stormwater coordination that are in the new reissued order?
You want to go
Anybody, Lucia or Keith
or Justin?
or Justin?
Well, it's interesting. We have separate sewer system, no known connections to storm systems. But we are in frequent contact with our municipalities that most of those do manage the storm systems. So typically we don't have any kind of ongoing impending needs to really coordinate storm sewers.
What about you, Lucia?
Well, I think for us, our system's separate. We don't really have a lot of the storm, but we do have the I&I infiltration.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah.
But
Accidental.
yes. So I think really for us is just you really need to start those conversations with your those agencies that are tributary to you and start those conversations and really have a set meeting to where you can have start dealing with it, the sooner the better.
Mhm.
Especially now because we have to incorporate it within our SSMP. Fortunately for us, we've already have that established. It's a little bit easier for us to have that part of our SSMP, the mutual aid program, and talk to it. And give examples of how we talk about issues when we're dealing with them. We have quarterly meetings within our region. So that's something that we've been really pushing throughout the state of just talking about the mutual aid program and trying to have others model what we have going on, so that way this can help them with the SSMP, really just starting those conversations and those agreements with their neighbors, really.
Yeah. Okay, again with the coordination, internal coordination, external coordination.
Yes, communication is key.
Yeah. All right, I want to switch it up a little bit and kind of ask about some of the metrics that you guys use to track internally your performance and see how you're doing. The reissued WDR, it really kind of puts a lot of emphasis on tracking your own metrics or your own KPIs or whatever you want to call it, and using that information to prioritize your maintenance and your capital planning. It's like a theme of the reissued WDR. Lucia, do you want to maybe start and talk about, did you change anything up this time around? Have you added new metrics that you're tracking or using that information in any new ways?
So we only have, when I say only, we have 150 miles of pipe within our region, which for a lot of people doesn't seem like a lot of miles, but it's large diameter pipe, very large. So it takes some time to get through the whole system. And so we've always kind of had our setup to where it's a KPI of touching and viewing, inspecting and cleaning within 5-year time. Everything. And so now that the SSMP has moved out to revamp every 6 years, because we want to follow the SSMP. We left it alone. We didn't change it because we wanted to make sure we always are touching everything within that 5-year time. But the team works at a 3-year rate. So we work at a 3-year rate so that way we can make sure we make it on time for that 5 years, because emergencies come up.
Yeah.
Requests for additional support in the treatment plant comes up, and training and all those things happen. People are off, so we want to make sure that within 3 to 5 years, we're touching the majority of our system. So we do have that incorporated in our GIS, to where we have a dashboard where I can monitor how much lineal feet is getting cleaned in a week. So we try to do 2,000 lineal feet within a week. I know, so some of the there's times where they can get that done in a day. But when things come up, I want to make sure that I'm allowing them time to get it done. And then also we're going to hit our 5-year timeline.
Great. Keith, do you want to talk about, has Chino developed any new metrics, or are you using any old metrics in a new way under this reissued SSMP?
We are and we're not. We typically use a contractor to help with cleaning and jetting and televising. So we do that as well. So we kind of do gangbusters on it. Well, we'll do one side, they'll do the other, or my lead for wastewater will schedule it. So what he likes to do north south one year and then east west the following year. And we put them up in a grid. So we have like quadrants. So we'll switch to one quadrant and then move our way. It takes we have 227 miles of sewer in our city. So it takes anywhere from 5 to 7 years to do one full, basically cleaning through the city. And then we're back to square one. So about the same time the SSMP is being updated, we're doing another cycle, start another cycle. So other than the addition of lower laterals and trying to get ahead of that as far as lateral launching and being ahead of the problem that we have in Chino, and I don't know if it is with any other agencies, it's an old city. We're incorporated in 1910. So our lower laterals and upper laterals are made of Orangeburg. So we're running into a lot of Orangeburg issues. And if you guys aren't familiar with Orangeburg, It was great materials back in the 50s and 60s, but the lifespan it's coming to an end. And what it's starting to do is it's starting to collapse on itself, and then therefore restricting the flow and then causing backups and whatnot. So when we find Orangeburg, we try and replace it with SDR or BCP when we can. And then just like Lucia had mentioned, we have a layer in our GIS that we're trying to update. Anytime staff does any kind of repairs, that's updated on the layer. They can click on it. Anyone can check it out in the city, and we're good to go.
Great. So really using that GIS to track what updates you're making. Justin, you want to talk about what your agency does? I know you guys have a lot of GIS enabled tasks.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've got 1,500 miles of sewer. We do have an extensive list of our own internal metrics. I think we've had that continuous improvement process of reflecting on data as it's coming in from our sewer system, and we've been pretty successful in driving down our SSO rates in the last decade or two. And I think a critical thing that I'm seeing for us as an agency is trying to appreciate with 1,500 miles, you're kind of a slow moving shift. So if there is a change in how your infrastructure is performing, it might start slowly. And what are those key indicators that you need to be looking for? Is it just information gathering purposes, or is it serving critical purposes of giving you underlying information of how your infrastructure is changing over time? And in recent years, like I say, we're down to 10 SSOs last year for 1,500 miles. That's our best year ever. But I think that the more we kind of look into our data, the more we see the need to look into it further, so we're not caught by surprise in the coming years of changes to our infrastructure through age and other things like that. So data is one thing, but is it useful data is the main thing. What's it telling you?
What are some of the key indicators that you're looking at besides spill rates?
Let's see. So we have a dashboard like Lucia mentioned for miles cleaned, work orders closed, spills, things like that. Reading off some of the other things, we have our renovation rate for miles renovated per year, how many siphons we clean per year, our large diameter program. Currently, we're on track to inspect all our large diameter pipes within the next 5 years or less now. We started that earlier in the year. Capital expenditure, response times. So there's a lot of metrics pertaining to customer service and responding promptly to overflows. But I think a key thing for engineers is with those amount of assets under the ground, how do you keep your finger on the pulse of what they're doing? Because when things start changing, you might get a kind of a tsunami coming in with numerous pipes that are failing at around the same time, and how do you deal with that? So
Right.
we're not there yet, but we're hoping to keep ahead of the wave there.
Great, thank you. I think for my last big question, I'd really like to ask each of you, what was the most, just more open-ended, like what was the most difficult part of the SSMP? And then also, after that, I'll just ask you to share any general advice you have for the audience. But let's start with what was the most difficult part? If there was there a difficult part? But if there was a difficult part, what was it? What was it for you, Justin?
Well, I guess, like I said, most of the information we already had available. We're pretty lucky in that regard. But having done this is my third time around, the formatting and some of what was being asked in the WDR was a little bit repetitive in some nature. So we're trying to figure out how do we not duplicate the same information in the SSMP. So when we come time to, if we do make changes, how do we figure out whereabouts in the SSMP the changes need to be made? So I think formatting was a big challenge to do it concisely, consistently, in a way that we could keep track of, making sure we update all sections when needed. Yeah.
Sounds like you're being very strategic about it, though. That's good to hear. Lucia, what was the most difficult part for you?
Well, one, also making sure we're not sounding repetitive. But also, since we had a consultant do it for us, making sure we had enough review time to review what they were helping us put together, and making sure to not miss anything, and having other groups have time to review it as well, to make sure that their responsibilities within that SSMP they agreed with, we didn't miss anything. And then any KPIs that we had incorporated made sense and was operationally doable. But I think making sure we had enough time to do the review was probably the most difficult thing, because we also had our board deadlines
Yeah.
to meet. So, yeah, the reviewing and making sure we got everything.
Great. What about you, Keith? What was the most difficult part?
Me being new to the position and the SSMP update, or the SSMP period, I'm going to say the language and the new
Mhm.
requirements. That honestly threw me for a loop. I couldn't wrap my head around it. There was questions that our consultant was asking, and I could not provide an answer because I didn't know the answer. I didn't know even where to look. So it was learning the SSMP and then discovering how to address the questions and the new requirements in a way that was conducive to the city and to the state.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of language that you figured out that you want to let everyone in the audience know what they mean? Because they may be
Well,
confused too.
Well, they were remember they're talking about the SERP, and they kept saying the SERP and the SERP. I'm like, I don't know what the SERP. What is a SERP? And they said the Spill Emergency Response Plan. I go, that still doesn't help me. So learning all that, how to react to a spill and an SSO, and the proper requirements on the recording, and who to notify, and all that stuff. That was all new for me. But so that's one component that we had to learn. I'm trying to think of any other things that came up regarding specifics, but they're escaping me right now. But
Yeah.
I related to, we did a lot of work with the ADA, and ADA has a CalDAG book that is very subjective, and it's a lot of language, and it can really throw you for a loop. So I kind of compared it to that. You're always dealing with interpretation.
Yeah. And learning all the acronyms and what the language is supposed to mean, I can understand there's a learning curve there for sure.
Right.
So I'll start with you, Keith, for this last question. Is there any just general guidance that you have for the audience here today, if they are somewhere in the middle of their SSMP update or haven't even started yet? What guidance do you have for them?
Well, I don't know what everyone's timeline and budget is, but I'll tell you right now, our consultant was a godsend, and was really ideal in how we were able to maneuver through this. So I would recommend utilizing a consultant if you don't have the individual, the staff to to do this yourself. They explained a lot, and I learned a lot. So that's what I would suggest or recommend. And plus, it doesn't hurt that the individual that's helping us was with the water board, so they kind of know a thing or two of what to expect.
Yeah, great. Lucia, what about you? Any advice?
Timeline. Your timeline, making sure that you give yourself enough time to get everything done. From looking at your agency's board deadlines or council deadlines to make sure it gets approved, and work your way backwards to make sure you can meet all those deadlines. Because if you start too late, you're really gonna, you're probably gonna miss the deadline, or if you do get the draft done, it's not gonna be approved by your council in time for the deadline. So that was the biggest thing, and giving yourself enough time to do the review process, like I said. And then making sure that you also have all the components and people that are responsible for certain areas in the SSMP involved at the front end.
Okay.
That's
Really
important.
team building.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, just making sure that they understand how they're gonna be affected by it.
How they're going to use it, maybe.
Yeah.
Justin, what about you? Any guidance for the group?
Based off my experience in previous years and listening to regulators, I think they always promote it to see it as an opportunity to share what you're doing good in an organization. So try to keep a positive spin on it in terms of your outlook on the process. Do things that are commensurate with the size of your organization. Just because Central San has certain initiatives or processes doesn't mean it's necessarily appropriate for the size of your organization, and your level of staffing and things like that. So I guess that's probably the two key things. And lastly is data. I mean, this time that we're living in, data is becoming very intensive for engineering and engineers and organizations. But keep in mind, is the data useful and what's it telling you? And because you're collecting data, is that the best use of your time? Make sure you're collecting information that's useful to your organization and providing dividends that you can act on.
Great advice. Thank you. With that, I have a couple of questions that have rolled in from other panelists. So I'm going to hit you guys with those. And then I just want to also encourage anyone in the audience, if you have any Q&A for our panel, please go ahead and type that into the Q&A functionality of Zoom. One question I have, a couple for you, Keith. You mentioned upfront that you did not meet the required schedule for the general order, and could you talk a little bit about for re-enrollment, I think is what that your comment was on that. What did you do when that happened?
Well, my boss was taking care of that, so he got the notification. I want to say maybe in July, and it was due in June. And so he reached out to, I believe, the state and explained what was going on, and they said it's okay, just submit, go ahead and do everything you can now. So when he did that, I believe that still basically put us late, as if you will, and to my understanding, and I could be wrong, now we were considered a new enrollee, and basically the clock started then to do the audit and then the update. So we were late on the audit, and we'll probably be late on the update, but we're working on it. We're trying to get it in as soon as possible.
Great. And there's others that are in the same situation, and they should just kind of follow your lead and do what you can to get back on schedule. Would you say that's the advice?
Right. And to follow up with Lucia, like the timeline, I would say be thorough, take your time, but don't take too much time. You don't want to rush through and just throw something at it and hopefully that it sticks and it works. You still want to make sure that the SSP is correct and everything, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. But again, we still, as a municipality, I still have to deal with the council. I still have to send it onto the agenda. I still have to submit it for their approval. So there's checks and balances along the way that delay the submittal into the state because I still have to get the board to approve.
Great comments that you still want a quality product in the end. Thank you. For any of the panelists, did you have any trouble with sort of the CWIC's State Water Board interface in terms of uploading it or getting your audit reports or your SSMP reports uploaded into CWIC's, or was that a smooth process?
I'll answer this. Well, it was a new process for me because I'm one of the LROs, and so the LRO is supposed to upload instead of having the data submitter do the upload. So that was what was different, and we noticed that when we did the SCRP and when we did the audit. So we just assumed for the SSMP that I was going to have to do the upload. So I actually did a shared screen and did the upload with our data submitter to make sure I was doing it correctly, and we kind of did it together. So that was probably the best thing to do, is the data submitter that's used to doing it, and now the LRO is doing all that once I got in and I knew where to navigate after a few times, it's been pretty easy.
Okay, so something to learn there potentially for folks. What about Keith or Justin? Did you have any issues with the upload process?
I did, just because of the re-enrollment that we missed. It was a little confusing. I had to reach out. I think I actually reached out to a Fruz and Han regarding that, and they were able to walk me through it. So they were very easy to work with. So it was just a little. I always contribute to user error, so that's me. So I was probably doing something wrong, but it was a little confusing because of the new enrollee designation. And then there was a part where I think you have to generate graphs, and I was like, "What are you talking about? I don't see. How do I generate a graph?" And then there's a little button on the top left, generate graph, and so once I learned that, it got real easy. So it's user friendly if you just kind of look at the whole picture. Sometimes you kind of key in on just where you submit certify, but there's other buttons that you can toggle through. So
Okay, so have some patience and be prepared to learn a few things in the process, sounds like.
yes.
What about you, Justin? Any issues?
No, no issues here.
Okay, thank goodness. At least somebody was able to do it. I have another question about the whole kind of board approval process. How did your organizations handle that board and council council approval? Like, did you do a presentation, or did you do a workshop, or did you just kind of bury it in the consent calendar? Like, how did you deal with that, Lucia?
Well, for us, we did a committee presentation. Just really kind of stuck to what we were doing, what were the updates, what is the WDR, what, just kind of refreshing them of all the regulatory side of it. And then what the SSMP is and what we use it for. And then we provided a copy within our document, but we just did a normal presentation, how we would at any committee meeting. And then that committee group decided to go to consent for the full board.
Very good. What about you, Justin?
Yes, same as Lucia there. Went to a committee, then full board. Number of changes to our board of directors since our last 5-year update. So yeah, it's a matter of just keeping those elected officials apprised of what you're doing, why you do it, and making sure that they get carried along in the journey. And our collection system managers give frequent updates to our board of directors. So no surprises in terms of what we're doing, and it's just a matter of having it all summarized in the SSMP. So it went very smoothly for us, but like Lucia said, it's all about prior preparation with your audience.
Yeah, and I liked what you said earlier about having it be a good opportunity to share what you're doing well. It's a great opportunity to share with your board or your council. What a great job you're doing. Keith, do you have plans at your agency for this finalization process?
Yes, once it's finalized, I'll get the powers of be to review to make sure that they're good with it. Then we'll look at the council agenda. I mean, the council dates, submit it, and then it's determined then if it's going to be new business or consent. So it's kind of out of my hands. We just wait to see, and if we need to, regardless, we still provide a staff report on the actual document, and then whether it's read or it's not, that's up to them.
Great. So lots of different approaches there. I think we're going to have Paul Kazi would like to respond to one of the questions in the chat live. Are you ready to do that, Paul?
Sure, I can handle that. Is that the one on the location of the WDR requirements and table of contents?
Yeah.
That would be, if you can go to the guidance document, the BACWA guidance document, there is a table in there that will indicate what's been changed, and will give you an information on what has to be included that wasn't, or that needs to be included from the last go around, the new stuff. So I would recommend that you go there.
Okay, very good. And I think that there is a link to that in the chat. And if
Right, correct.
you can always go to the State Water Board's website for a lot of good guidance documents, plus videos. And I think there's going to be a whole part of this webinar later where we talk about some of the resources that are available to help folks.
Mary, I would also comment on one other thing in terms of if you don't meet your deadlines that are in the SSMP for the audit submittal, for the annual report, or for the SSMP upload, there is a new requirement now that you have to notify both the regional board and the state board, and you have to indicate what the schedule is that you're going to work on to submit those documents. And the other thing to understand and know is that even if you're late, the future document deadlines do not change. And so if you're a year late for in the 3-year audit period, you're going to have to do another audit 2 years from the end of that. So very important to understand what your role is and responsibilities are in terms of keeping the state informed of where you are. You, as Keith indicated, you're not in compliance if you don't meet the deadlines. And so that puts you in some possible jeopardy. But I'd say you need to work very closely with both the state board and the regional board if you don't meet deadlines. So those are the things I'd like to point out at this point.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. We had a question from an attendee that I think is a good one about collaborating with storm agencies. I tried to hit on this, but getting a little more specific, like exactly what did you do to coordinate and collaborate with your local stormwater agency? Did you get some kind of formal letter that says it's okay to access storm drains during spills? Do you have a verbal agreement with them? Like, what are the arrangements that you actually have with your local stormwater agency about coordinating operations in the event of a spill? Justin, what about you?
Yes, so I don't know if we really stipulated it explicitly in our response in the SSMP, how we do that, but yes, we're very well apprised of our leaders in our stormwater agencies and the local cities that our service area encompasses. So as soon as we have an overflow, when the incident does occur, we're calling them and letting them know what's going on and how we're responding if we need them to come out and help us and things like that. But yeah, I guess that was a theme in this WDR's. If you do a process, make sure it's written down and documented. So good question.
So you kind of wrote up what you do, and then maybe they have access to a copy of that as well as an agreement for how that coordination works.
Yeah, but no official agreement as such,
but some kind of protocol.
Mhm.
What about you, Lucia? Any agreements in place or just
Well,
text?
it's more, we have with our agencies, like with City of Chino that has, some storm drains and things like that. We have a mutual aid agreement, like a formal agreement, but that's more for emergency response. It's not really related to tapping in, but it's more of a verbal, if we need assistance, we are able to do that. So, which is incorporated in the SSM, what we do.
Since you have kind of a different type of system,
Yeah.
not the small pipes.
Yeah.
What about you, Keith? I guess you're a city, so you don't really need internal agreement. Is it just kind of informal the way you operate with your storm system?
Yeah, it's pretty much just the staff out there that are handling it. They're, every now and then we might get a little of involvement from the city of Ontario, which is just to the northeast of us. But we self-manage. It's really just kind of we don't really have any issues in that department.
Good to hear. Okay, I got one more question from another panelist here. And I think this one might be the last one. And this is just kind of looking forward. How do you use the SSMP? And maybe how do you kind of keep it updated before the next major update? What do you do with it now that you're done?
Well, we have it posted.
Okay.
We have it posted on our website. We've shared it with our member agencies and they're sharing theirs with us. So we have, an idea of what's going on and what they're doing. But we also have a copy for our staff to make sure everyone has location where it's at. And then honestly, annually, we're gonna look at it and make sure that we're following protocol. If we need to make any changes, we document that. So it makes it easier for the audit. That's the plan.
Kind of keep it a living document. Right. What about you, Justin?
Well, one of the key things we do is train, make sure our staff, particularly our operations staff, are trained on the SSMP, which because several times a year for us. And aside from that, it's a great document that captures the essence of how you manage your sewer system. So when it comes time to talk to board members about strategic goals or how you manage certain aspects of your sewer system, it gives you a resource that you can share information and guide people to learn about certain processes. It kind of is a one-stop shop to really understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if you're not sure why you're doing it, then maybe you need to take a look into that a bit further in certain aspects of your operations.
Excellent response. Thank you. What about you, Keith? What are you going to do next once it's done?
Once it's done, we'll do the same as Lucia and IUA. We'll post it on our website so the public can view it. It will be treated as a living document. The biggest thing is training. So we want to make sure the guys, because sometimes, especially we don't, knock on wood, we don't get a lot of SSOs. So we don't want to get complacent to where if we do get one, what do we do? So we want to make sure that we're involved and we're still training that. We do have trainings, mutual aid trainings with the other agencies that we did a spill response a couple weeks ago. We hosted it, so it's getting that repetition in to make sure that they're good to go. We do have some things that were called out as far as signage and as far as some things that we could do now to implement so that is taken care of and checked off the list that we're deficient in. And then we'll continue, like I said, annual training to make sure that we're up to date. We'll have it printed. We'll have it with the sewer crew so they could just continue to follow it till the next time we update it.
All right, very good. Well, with that, I'd like to thank our three panelists that really went into depth on how they crafted and how they're going to use their revised SSMPs. The next item on our webinar calendar is a 10-minute break. So we're going to have a little break and then we will return with two panels from the State Water Resources Control Board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. We will return at 2:15.
Welcome back from the break. We're going to get started again. I'm Steve Jepson from Clean Water SoCal, and I'll be your moderator for the next part of the webinar, where we'll be hearing from State Water Board representatives. First, from the Office of Enforcement, and then from the SSS WDR compliance team. Once again, please type your questions in the Q&A box. Before we get started, I'll introduce the Office of Enforcement speakers. Brian Elder is a supervising control engineer with the State Water Resources Control Board and serving as the section manager for the Investigations and Technical Assistance section at the Office of Enforcement. He's been with the Water Board for over 11 years. Prior to that, he worked on design and maintaining permit compliance for the private sector. Brian has been a regular presenter at CWEA and other events, and we appreciate his accessibility and outreach. Also, we have Jamie Steele. She's a water resource control engineer with the State Water Resources Control Board Office of Enforcement, where her work ranges from collection system inspections to economic benefit analysis to operator investigations. Jamie is a registered professional engineer, having been involved in the water industry for over a decade. Jamie has presented at conferences, had articles published in industry magazines, and was the 2022 CWEA Outstanding Young Professional of the Year. Little secret, I'm on that Outstanding Professional of the Year panel. Finally, German Myers is a professional engineer with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Engineering and a Master of Science in Civil and Environmental Engineering. He currently works as a water resource control engineer at the State Water Board's Office of Enforcement, where his work ranges from economic benefit analysis to operator investigations to collection system audits, where he evaluates compliance with the State Water Board's sanitary sewer systems general order. So without further ado, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Steve. That must have been a new narrative because I don't think that's the narrative I sent you, but I appreciate all the additional comments there. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Brian Elder. I'm a manager here in the Office of Enforcement at the State Water Board in Sacramento. Again, I'm joined by my two colleagues, engineers and inspectors, Jamie Steele and Jeremy Myers. And today we're going to be presenting on compliance and enforcement related to the sanitary sewer system waste discharge requirements.
Hey Brian, just real quick, are you seeing the right screen? Is it the big one?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead and go to this is a summary of the key topics that we plan to cover. Water board roles and responsibilities. I'm going to share some enforcement metrics at the top of the presentation. Our progressive enforcement strategy here at the water boards. We're going to talk specifically about the enforceability of the sanitary sewer system WDRs that I'll shorten to SS WDRs. We're going to talk a little bit about regulations surrounding our civil liabilities or penalties and a brief overview of our enforcement policy. A little bit on as a summary of compliance expectations. Then I'm going to turn this presentation over to Jamie and German to walk you through water board inspections and audit process and the findings from those activities. Go ahead, next slide. So this is an overview of water board's responsibilities as it relates to the SSS WDR program. You can see that clearly all of the regional boards have compliance and enforcement staff that support various enforcement programs, including this one. The Office of Enforcement additionally has staff that support compliance and enforcement inspections and audits, compliance assistance. We also perform training internally, as well as supporting a lot of these trade and industry organizations as well. Division of Water Quality are sort of the other half. These would be your permit writers, compliance assistance to a certain degree, and obviously on the reporting side. Go ahead, next slide. So all of these water board staff serve specific purposes and special purposes. On our permitting side, we're typically involved in proactively identifying and addressing threats to water quality that sewage poses, as well as public safety and program integrity on the reporting and monitoring side. As far as compliance and enforcement, what is the intent there? We're there to identify and encourage industry standards and best practices. You're going to see that later in the presentation. And enforcement, really the key here is we want to level the playing field. We want to recognize that all of your agencies out there are doing a lot of work to stay compliant with the WDR. We want to make sure that there's an enforcement element there that supports that and deters non-compliance. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So what exactly does enforcement look like at the water boards? I thought it would be a good opportunity to sort of introduce you to the water board's water quality compliance and enforcement program at large. These metrics are from 2022 to present. So we're looking at just about 2.5 years or so of data here. In that time, the water boards across all of our water quality programs, or the vast majority of them, have conducted almost 22,000 inspections, over 13,000 enforcement actions. A little over half of those would be considered informal. These would be your notice of violations and staff enforcement level, or staff enforcement letter type of enforcement actions. But still, about 1,000 administrative civil liabilities or penalty type actions, as well as our expedited payment letters, which is essentially something very similar, and just under 100 of the cease and desist orders or time scheduled orders, pushing for compliance. So quite a bit of action. Wanted to set you up for what this particular program enforcement numbers look like. So Jeremy, if you could go ahead and go to the next slide. So as far as the SSS WDRs, same period of time, 82 inspections, which I know doesn't necessarily sound like a lot in the grand scheme of things. But the reality is it's a resource expensive, so to speak, program. Our audits are typically they're very long processes. They take multiple months. It's a lot of program review rather than boots on the ground, so to speak. So 82 inspections is actually a significant increase. Most of these have probably been done in the last couple of years. And we obviously want to give ourselves a shout out here that about 34 of those have been done by the Office of Enforcement. Of those inspections, those 34 that have been done by the Office of Enforcement are your very extensive compliance evaluation inspection. They cover a lot of your program details, your planning, the funding, essentially all of the elements of the WDR that's required and included in many cases in your sewer system management plan. All of those 82, some of those you can kind of see that there's a pretty significant number in Region 2. Some of these may be focused inspections, they may be complaint-based. So not all of these are those extensive, broad spectrum audits, but we do want to illustrate that there are inspections going on in this particular program. And it's important to realize that. Over the last couple of years, there have been 11 administrative civil liabilities, or again, these are our penalty type of cases surrounding these WDRs. And I will get more into the details there in a few slides here, but I wanted to recognize that, we have issued penalties in excess of $16 million as they relate to sewer spills from public systems. And this is essentially for about 24 million gallons that reach surface water. Of that 16 million, I think it's important to recognize that about 13 million went to enhanced compliance actions or supplemental environmental projects. So the reality here is only about $1 million of that went actually back into those systems for enhanced compliance. And nearly the vast remainder of that money actually left the system. So rather than using this money for compliance, these systems had spills. Those penalties were essentially funds that for deterrence purposes and leveling the playing field purposes were removed from that system that otherwise could have been used for compliance. And the reason I bring that up is that that's a huge incentive, I think, for this industry to be compliant and to avoid those types of situations. So again, why am I showing you all this? We're going to dig into how these penalties can actually reflect your agency's sewer program in a bit here. So we'll move on to the next slide. So let's talk about the Water Board's approach to enforcement. We're directed by the Water Quality Enforcement Policy to implement a progressive enforcement strategy. And what does that mean? Progressive enforcement is escalating enforcement. It starts with cooperation, compliance assistance. It moves towards heavy-handed direct approach, the carrot versus the stick model. Again, the intent here is to level the playing field and create that deterrence or that disincentive for non-compliance. So as an example, we may perform an inspection, identify compliance concerns or even violations, and those might be verbally noticed to the agency while on site, giving them an opportunity to correct. If they don't, we might formalize the inspection report, send out a notice of violation with an informal directive to correct those same compliance issues. If they fail to respond or adequately address those concerns, we escalate potentially to a formal directive like an investigative order or a cease and desist order. These would formalize those directives and timelines, and they carry that potential penalty in the event they're not complied with. Now, this scheme is not always appropriate. Obviously, there are egregious violations, there are serious failures within the system, or catastrophic loss that may warrant short-circuiting that process, but it's important for you to understand how we do enforcement. Next slide. So there are different types of enforcement that many of these you've probably heard of. But we typically bucket these into informal and formal enforcement. Informal is probably your most common form of enforcement. You saw at the top, over half of our enforcement actions program-wide within the water boards are informal. These are your verbals. These are your email notifications or staff enforcement letter, even a notice of violation. They're typically a warning, so to speak, with typically a directive to return to compliance, essentially, before there's a next step. Formal enforcement are statute-based actions that address the violation or threatened violation. These are notices to comply, investigative orders, or as we call them, Section 13268 orders, cleanup and abatement orders, cease and desist orders, time schedule orders, and then the administrative civil liability complaint, which is essentially these are, again, driven by statute, and all of these carry the potential for financial penalties or injunctive relief. Next slide. So probably the question of the day here today is, are the provisions in the WDR enforceable? Okay. Go ahead. Yes, they are. So how are they enforceable? What does enforceable mean? It means that not only does the water board have the authority to bring enforcement for violations of the WDR, but also that the enforcement can be brought formally and I think for simplicity can carry a penalty. We can write notice of violations and staff enforcement letters all day long, but how do we facilitate return to compliance? Enforcement of the WDRs has been historically problematic. Water Code Section 13350, for example, allows for enforcement of waste discharge requirements, but typically only in the event of a discharge. Alternatively, for our stormwater programs that have National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits, NPDES permits, Water Code Section 13385 allows direct formal enforcement of non-discharge violations. So if you fail to provide a stormwater pollution prevention plan, or it's deficient, or your best management practices are not implemented adequately, we have a lot more teeth as far as going directly to the permit and the violation within the permit. So while we regularly enforce the WDR, in this case, the sanitary sewer system WDR, using informal tools like NOVs and SELs, most formal enforcement is subjected to spills. We do have that authority, however, to formally enforce non-discharge violations, such as a lack of an SSMP or inadequate SSMP elements. And the new WDR actually clarifies that authority. We'll go to the next slide here. Specifically, Section 5.18 of the order provides the legal mechanism by which the water boards can mandate permittees to produce information that documents compliance with the order. To paraphrase, in accordance with Water Code Section 13267 and/or 13383, upon request, the enrollee shall provide the requested information to determine compliance with this general order. Essentially, we can demand, using penalty-carrying water code statutes, that the sewer system master management plan, or elements of it have the potential for fines for non-compliance. I should also note that Section 6.1.7 of the WDRs further authorizes the state board or regional board to request results of a condition assessment of a specific portion of the sanitary sewer system, again, consistent with these same two water codes. For more clarity, the findings section of the WDR explains in a little bit more detail about what that authority actually is. We'll go on to the next slide here. So this is an example. It's an old example, but it's an example of the use of Water Code 13267, which is essentially a investigative order for a technical report. In this case, the city of Etna had enrolled in the 2006 WDR, but they failed to comply with the sewer system management plan certification, spill reporting, and the annual reports, or formally questionnaire. The 13267 order simply demanded that they comply with the order, with the WDR, specifically calling out the requirements to prepare, implement, and certify an SSNP by a certain date. What happened there is that they failed to fully engage with the water boards. They did initially, but ultimately we were forced to take formal enforcement for failing to meet the timeline in the 13267. Ultimately, they ended up settling this case, $19,000. Again, all of this money that probably could have been used to comply with the WDR, that money was received by the water boards and went into our cleanup and abatement account. Next slide. This is an example of an informal enforcement related to SSMP violations. So what if you have an SSMP, but the water boards, following an inspection or an audit, find it deficient? In this situation, we inspected an agency about 10 years ago and found elements of the SSMP deficient. In this case, the regional board issued a notice of violation directing the city to immediately implement corrective action. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The NOV described the waste discharge requirement provision, and again, in this case, this was the 2006 order, but not dissimilar to what our new order has, and how it was determined to be deficient with our expectations and our reading of BWDR. In this case, it was determined through interviews, document review, city service records, and other documents, that there was no formal capital improvement program being followed for this agency. At the very least, what was on paper as far as a capital improvement plan wasn't what was in practice, specifically with capital project prioritization and scheduling. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, if you've seen presentations by me over probably most of the last decade, you've probably seen this map. It's something that I go back to regularly because I think it really illustrates my point. This map spatially illustrates what we found during the audit. This color-coded map represents asset risk level assignments across the sewer system. The capital improvement plan that was described to us was focused on high-risk areas as a priority. Those would be the red areas, which I wrote in my notes, which are the red areas. However, when we reviewed completed projects for the past 3 fiscal years at the time of inspection, we found that non-emergency projects, so scheduled projects, were completed in varying risk levels across their system. While there is undoubtedly a reason for these project prioritizations, and in no way is the water boards dictating where, when, or how those improvements are made, It doesn't fit the plan that was presented to the water boards as their CIP. And it certainly didn't match up with that plan that was described in the SSMP. So hence the notice of violation with a directive to return to compliance. Next slide. So my colleagues here are going to walk you through some of the specifics of what we're looking for in our field inspections and program audits. But for big picture purposes, here are the major elements within the sewer system management plan that we might review for adequacy and implementation verification. Are you practicing what you preach? Are you doing what you say you're doing? Areas to highlight your operation and maintenance program. How are you performing O&M? Where are you focusing? How frequently are you conducting them? Your CERT, your spill emergency response plan. How are you responding? How are you mitigating spills? How are you recovering? System evaluation, condition assessment, prioritization, scheduling, your communication program. Are you talking with your tributaries, your satellites, your downstream wastewater treatment plant? Do you have mutual aid agreements? Next slide. This is just an example that I stole from my colleagues. This is a hotspot location for a particular agency. I know it's really hard to see, but what I'm trying to illustrate is that this system has over 50 hotspot locations, which are color-coded. As depicted in the legend, this agency specifies the preventative maintenance frequency for each hotspot location, as well as whether the problem is due to fog, fats, which would be your fats, oils, greases. If this were included in the SSMP, is this being executed? Are these fog locations truly being cleaned monthly? These would be things that we'd be checking for and things we would document as a potential violation of the plan that's presented to them. Next slide. Another example of an agency's condition assessment analysis. In this case, grade 5 defects being described as has failed or will likely fail within 5 years. If we are inspecting this agency and identify assets with these defects, we'll be looking at the programming for repair and replacement to assess the adequacy of the plan. As an example, we inspected the city of San Carlos several years ago, where they had many high-risk pipe defects that would fall into a category as described here. However, their correction plan seemed slow, leaving dozens, if not hundreds of these defects unaddressed for years. Clearly, this caused us some great discomfort, and it resulted in a lot of significant discussions and compliance assistance with the city regarding how they categorize and how they prioritize those high-risk defects so that we could understand and feel comfortable with, again, the plan being presented to us. Next slide. So we've talked a little bit about compelling compliance through informal and formal compliance. What about when we need the big stick? Administrative civil liabilities or penalties are tools that the water boards use to level the playing field again for sewer agencies and deter noncompliance. We have penalty mechanisms under the water code. Water Code section 13268 gives the water boards the authority to levy fines for failing to provide information to us. This is an example of that Aetna case that I presented. If we requested a compliant version of your SSMP or some subcomponent of it, this is a teeth we can threaten. For discharges, for those SSOs or spills, Water Code section 13350 and 13385 are the mechanisms that we use to levy fines on the days and the gallons related to the event. Clearly what you can see from what we have on the slide here is that these administrative penalties can be significant, and literally every day of non-compliance counts. Next slide. So just a real quick overview of the enforcement policy. The enforcement policy was created to standardize enforcement cases across the state. It provides a framework for fair, consistent, firm, and transparent enforcement. What does that mean? It means that a penalty in the North Coast region, so the Santa Rosa region, Humboldt, should follow a similar methodology to the one in Colorado River Basin, so down in Plexico or El Centro. This is done using a penalty methodology framework that's based on a number of factors unique to the region and to the incident. Next slide. So this graphic illustrates the general framework for our two types of cases, discharges and non-discharges. Discharge cases would be your typical spill case, 20,000 gallons to a drainage course, a stream, the ocean, etc. Non-discharge would be your failure to prepare or implement or meet a timeline of a sewer system management plan, or failure to submit an annual report, for example. In either case, the violation is assessed for actual harm or potential for harm. This could be demonstrated by fish kills or algae blooms in a discharge sense, or harm to the regulatory program by intentionally failing to report or underreport, or failing to have a particular plan that's required by the WDR. There are other considerations within these assessments, but in the interest of time, I want to focus on the adjustment factors and the economic benefit, as these are elements of the methodology that you find most relatable to your sewer program. Next slide. There are 3 adjustment factors for any water quality penalty: culpability, cleanup and cooperation, and history of violations. Culpability is the degree of negligence that contributed to the violation. Was the discharger aware of the pipe's condition that ultimately ruptured and caused a major spill? Or was this an unforeseen catastrophic event, such as a break caused by a construction contractor or extreme unpredictable weather event? You can see the range that the factor can have. This factor can either decrease or increase the ultimate penalty. As you can see, an extremely negligent incident could result in as much as a 50% increase in the penalty. Cleanup and cooperation is the degree to which a discharger responds to the violation. So for a spill, did the agency take all reasonable steps to stop it, capture it, and return the release to the system? Were they cooperative in their regulatory response, or did they stonewall agencies at every opportunity? Again, this factor can have an extreme impact on the penalty. Finally, for history of violations, does the agency have a history of similar natured violations? Have they been penalized or issued formal directives before for noncompliance? Have they had repeat spills due to similar factors? Notice there's no upper limit to how this factor can be applied. It's also important to note that these factors apply to non-discharge violations. In the case of Aetna, failing to prepare and certify an SSMP compliant with the WDRs at the time, they were aware of the requirements, and they even certified some of those sections. They initially responded to state board staff, it was actually me at the time, but ultimately chose not to address the violations, and they disengaged from those communications. This ultimately impacted those factors and drove that penalty up above $19,000. Next slide. I also want to talk quickly about economic benefit. Economic benefit is an analysis that we perform with every penalty case. The enforcement policy requires that we evaluate what economic benefit, or essentially any savings, that the discharger gains by not complying. Essentially, what costs did they delay or outright avoid that resulted in the violation? These costs are ultimately assessed using the time value of money, the concept that $1 today is worth $1 or is worth less than $1 yesterday. In reality, it's a complicated analysis using financial modeling, and I'm not going to get into that, but the general analysis, the compliance action assessment, is important for you all to understand. So what are we assessing? What should have been done? What was done? And what will be done? In the case of a pipe failure causing a large spill, did the agency avoid maintenance on that segment or delay a capital improvement project? If this is SSMP related, did the agency avoid the cost of developing a CERT, a spill emergency response plan, or a capital improvement plan, or the certification process? These actions would be evaluated by our staff and could set a floor for the penalty. Next slide. So let's take a quick look at applications so you can see why I presented this and where I'm going. I mentioned at the top of the presentation that since 2022, there have been 11 spill cases resulting in a civil liability or a penalty order. Again, these are adjudicated or final cases that have been approved by their government, the regional boards. All of these ACLs, all of these penalties are associated with spills. So what you're not seeing on this slide are any civil liabilities or any penalties associated with non-discharge violations like SSMP violations or reporting violations. Does that only reinforce that the WDR is not enforceable? Not at all. In fact, these spill cases were significantly impacted by sewer program compliance. In these 11 cases, only one had a culpability score of less than 1, meaning that in that case, the regional board found that the agency could not have done more to prevent or mitigate the spill. In the other 10 cases, the SSMP implementation, so program implementation or inadequacies with that program were used to move the culpability up, to increase the penalty. What were the specifics? Inadequate condition assessment, no formal field inspection program for things like manholes, failure to implement timely capital improvement, inadequate operation and maintenance procedures, not following emergency response procedures. In the largest of these cases, which was a $6 million settlement, the culpability score was 1.3, 30% increase. And what was it for? Identifying critical infrastructure and capacity risks and failing to address them in a timely manner. And when I say timely, this is timely by their own standard. So rough calculation, it's about a $1.4 million mistake that resulted in about an 8.5 million gallon spill to surface water. In another case, culpability factor was 1.2. Again, this is a 20% increase in penalty. In this case, it failed to perform adequate maintenance on siphons and failed to implement recommendations from an internal condition assessment on a pump station. $4.6 million penalty, 11.2 million gallon spill. Culpability probably accounted for about 800,000 left. So while direct penalties for SSMP deficiencies are not as common, they certainly can and do have an impact on the penalties when a spill occurs. I should also note that our progressive enforcement approach has an outstanding record of achieving compliance informally. Agencies we have historically inspected typically have resolved compliance concerns voluntarily. And I use the term voluntarily lightly because obviously getting an NOV probably instills some motivation for working with us towards a compliant solution. Next slide. So hopefully there are some takeaways from the enforcement penalty discussion. What do we expect? For your sewer system management plan, we want to see that the plan you develop is the plan you use. The procedures should reflect what you're doing. And if that changes over time, it should be documented and revised. In the event of an incident, these plans, procedures, condition assessments, asset management, prioritization, and scheduling are likely to be heavily scrutinized. So while our progressive enforcement approach may not immediately jump to the penalty phase for inadequate SSMPs or inadequate program implementation, these concerns will be factored into discretionary enforcement for spills. In the same vein, your spill response, including your spill reduction and recovery, is also going to be reviewed and factored in. Next slide. So now that we've covered how our enforcement program is applied to collection system, let's talk a little bit how we're proactively addressing compliance. The reality is there's not dedicated staff within the water boards that regularly perform audits on collection systems. So even though there is an expectation from the United States EPA that states routinely inspect collection systems, the resources and the expertise to do so are severely lacking. This is why we rely so heavily on your self-reporting. US EPA issued the Clean Water Act NPDES compliance monitoring strategy in 2014, which set a target for states to inspect 5% of all sanitary sewer systems each year. You saw the numbers. We inspected 82 systems in 2 years, 3 years. I'm not sure how many systems the other 49 states have, but we currently have 1,027 active enrollees. So performing audits on 5% of these systems, which takes months to plan and to execute, is really unrealistic without dedicated staff. Last year, we made a concerted effort to work with EPA on what that universe of systems we really should be required to look at. And we've come to somewhat of a more reasonable number, but the intention is of scaling these numbers up. But even at 5%, the reality is that we have found ways to target priority systems for inspections. You might think this is simply focused on the bad actors, but really we apply unique criteria and we're regularly evaluating initiatives to look for different trends. Some past areas of focus were systems that serve pollution-burdened communities, systems that appear to be under-reporting or threshold reporting, Being selected for audit does not necessarily mean that you're identified as problematic, and you might see that in my colleague's presentation. In fact, we're routinely finding systems that demonstrate best practices in the industry, and we try to highlight these systems in our inspection reports and at trade and industry presentations such as this. So to the extent that we can help you understand what we're looking for and how you can better prepare for one of these potential audits, I'm going to turn the presentation over to my STAR program engineers, Jamie Steele and Jeremy Myers.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Brian said, I'm Jeremy Myers, and Jamie and I will now go over what you should expect when you're inspected. All right, so a quick overview of what we'll cover on this topic. I'll start off with a basic understanding of how we determine who we inspect, go over what documents and information we look for, and touch on some important program elements. Jamie will then go over what we are looking for when we're out in the field, and then what some of the common violations are that we have been seeing. We'll then end with some key takeaways and then open the floor to questions. All right, so starting off, how do we determine which systems to inspect? Well, let me ask you a question. Based on these two photos here, which system would you rather inspect? For me, I would want to inspect the system on the left. Why? Looking at the photo, I can see that there is a lot of debris in the channel and on the channel bench. There appears to be staining within the barrel, and the bench and channel appear that they could be deteriorating. The photo on the right, however, shows a fairly clean manhole. Little to no debris, no apparent staining, and good flow in the channel with no blockages. The system on the right seems to be maintaining their assets, whereas the system on the left might not be performing maintenance as much as they should. So for us, we want to inspect those systems that may be underperforming so we can work with those systems to get them back into compliance. So how do we do that? The photos in the previous slide were taken during inspections, but how do we get to a point to determine which systems to inspect prior to getting out in the field? We take a look at your documents and information to give us an insight on how the collection system program is being ran. We look at CWIX data. Do you have an up-to-date annual report? Are you reporting spills? Are your no-spill certifications up to date? We look at your SSMP. Is it updated, uploaded to CWIX? Does it contain all the program elements? Have you been performing those internal audits? We check to see if you have a spill emergency response plan or a SERP. Are you reviewing, and we review how you're responding to those spills and how you are notifying the proper agencies. We look to see if you have a blockage or fog program. Is your capital improvement plan up to date? Is your sewer master plan up to date? Does it include a capacity assessment? We look to see what information you might have on your agency's websites. And then sometimes we will send you a questionnaire to different agencies to get a more in-depth view of the program. As I mentioned before, we look at CWIX data, which I'll remind all of you that it is publicly available information that can be found on our water board's webpage. Reviewing CWIX data gives us an insight on how the collection system program may be operating. So in these next few slides, I just want to go over some brief examples and show you what we might be looking at when we're looking at the CWIX data. Here we have data for the annual reports. What I like to look at in the annual reports is how much agencies are cleaning and inspecting their pipes. There are a couple here in this table that stand out to me. These three here stand out. Why? Here, they inspected less than 3% of their system in the 2022-2023 time period. And then these two systems stand out to me as well. They have cleaning percents of just under 20% for the 2022 and 2023 year. These are just a couple examples what I look for the annual reports, but the annual reports also contain other important information such as your age of the infrastructure, lateral responsibility, how many lift stations you guys have, and so forth. All right. This is an example here of what information that we look at for the SSMP. Is there anything that stands out? These three systems stand out to me. Taking a look at the first one, we see that the last update to the SSMP occurred in 2014, which is way overdue for an update. What about the bottom one? The SSMP had an update in 2023, just a couple years ago. But the problem is that the SSMP is not uploaded to CWIX, which is a requirement of the order. And then taking a look at the middle one, we see that the last SSMP update was in 2009 and that it is not uploaded to CWIX, both of which are issues. And then this last example here I'll go over is spill reporting. This one here is one system that has had a lot of category 1 spills, high volume spills that are reaching surface waters. So when we see this, when we're reviewing the data, we ask ourselves, what is going on with this system to cause these spills to occur? Maybe we want to inspect this system and see how we can help or assist in getting the system back into compliance. And then on the flip side to this is if we see that agencies are not reporting spills, we'll look at your no spill certifications to see if those are up to date and submitted on time. If we see that agencies are not reporting spills and they are not submitting their no spill certifications, that is a big red flag for us because it tells us that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And we may want to investigate further to see what other things you aren't doing. Okay, so some program elements. One program element that I want to touch on is the O&M program. The O&M program might be the most important part of the SSMP and the agency's program for its collection system. As the name implies, it outlines how the agency operates and maintains its sewer system. And these are the main parts that we look for when reviewing your documents. We look to see if you have some form of asset mapping system. More and more agencies are switching over to GIS software where they can visually see all of their assets and easily obtain pertinent information such as pipe diameter, pipe material, the last time a pipe was cleaned or inspected, or other maintenance performed. As I mentioned previously, we looked at cleaning and inspections and what schedules or frequencies you might be performing these. While the order requires agencies to have some form of cleaning and inspection schedule, it doesn't require a specific set schedule. But I will say that from our experience, agencies that have cleaning frequencies of more than every 5 years and inspection frequencies of more than every 10 years would raise alarms, and we would ask whether that is good enough. So we look to see that you have a schedule or frequencies outlined in your SSMP, and then when we inspect you, we make sure, like Brian said earlier, that you're following through with what you say that you're doing. The next aspect is preventative maintenance. We look to see how often you are checking your lift stations, how often you are checking alarm functionality. Are you exercising your valves? Do you have a hotspot list that you clean on a more frequent basis, and so forth? We look at your rehabilitation and replacement program or your capital improvement program. Do you have short-term and long-term plans? Do you have a ranking system to prioritize corrective actions? Systems will often use the NASCO grading systems to rate defense, but some systems elect to develop and use their own ranking system. And then other things, do you have written standard operating procedures? The order requires that agencies have procedures for the management, operation, and maintenance of the collection system. And it's very helpful for staff on how to perform specific duties. We see a lot of agencies that have high turnover and rely on essentially knowledge being passed down to new employees. So it's important to have these SOPs written down in a place for staff to refer back to, especially when you have those more senior staff leave and take their knowledge with them. You want to make sure that all staff know how to perform proper operations and where to find the resources when needed. And last, training. Agencies are required to train their staff on O&M activities, and we look at what trainings you're doing and how often you're doing them. All right, so let's talk about the sewer pipe blockage control program. This is, to me, another important element that we take a look at because blockages are probably the biggest cause for spills. This was previously known as the FOG program, but was updated in the new order to include other common blockages such as rags and debris. I will say, though, that from my experience, FOG is still probably the most common source of a blockage, and many of these programs are still geared towards FOG. So what do we like to see when we're looking at your FOG or blockage program? We check to see if you have grease removal device requirements for your FSEs or your food service establishments. We look to see if you're performing FSE or FOG inspections and how often you're performing them. Are you doing them every 6 months? Are you doing them annually? What do you do during these inspections? Do you measure the solids content in the grease traps or interceptors? Are you checking for kitchen BMPs as part of your inspections? How do you deal with those problem facilities? We look to see what kind of public outreach you are doing and what education is being provided on what not to put down your drains. Do you send out annual mailings or brochures? Do you use door hangers? Is there information on your agency's website? This to me is definitely an important program element because as these pictures depict, and I'm sure as we all know, blockages can constrict the flow and cause spills to occur. And then one of the last things I like to look at is information on your agency's website. Sometimes you can find information here that would not have been found in other places that we've talked about today. And this may include budget and financial information, current or ongoing projects, projects that you have out to bid. And as I mentioned earlier, some agencies may put FOG information on their website. We like to see how transparent the agency is being with the community and what educational material is being provided. This here is an example of an agency that has a lot of information on their website. So shout out to the City of San Luis Obispo. We inspected them a couple years ago and they have a pretty well-run program. They have maintenance and inspection information, construction, repair, and capital investment information, and information on a sewer lateral program. All of the things that I just discussed today is just our general approach on how we determine who to inspect. Now, I only touched on just a few things of what we look at, but it's definitely not everything. As I mentioned before, we take a closer look at your sewer master plan, any capacity assessments, your CIP, your SERP, essentially any documents that we can find to get an understanding and an idea of how the program is being ran and what compliance issues there may be. And now on the flip side to that is if we can't find any of these documents or information that I've discussed, that is also a flag for us and may warrant further investigation. Now with that, I will hand it over to Jamie.
All right, thanks, German. Now that we've covered how we prepare for an inspection, you might be wondering, what is it we're looking for in the field? Well, that is a great question, and I'm going to go over that right now. Now, not every agency has all of these assets, but some typical field assets that we look at include manholes, lift stations, grease interceptors, aerial crossings, pass fill locations, and capital improvement project locations. Now, a question people often want to know as I'm repeatedly peering in a manhole and taking notes is, what am I looking for? And what I'm really looking for are questions to ask you. So first up, maintenance issues. If we see bugs or cockroaches, we might want to ask if you have an insecticide program. If we see fog buildup or wipes in the channel, maybe your sewer pipe blockage control program needs some work. And if there's debris on the bench, maybe you aren't cleaning frequently enough. Any defects we see in the manhole, damage, rusted steps, cracks, missing bricks, so forth, those are all signs the manhole may need to be repaired or rehabilitated. So in that case, we might want to find out whether you perform manhole inspections. If so, what do you look for? Do you have a defect grading system? What would you consider cause for repair? And finally, we may not always be able to see an active leak when we're looking in a manhole, but we can sometimes see signs of possible I&I or inflow and infiltration. So if we see staining in the barrel, that could be where water is getting into the manhole. And if there's sediment on the bench, that might indicate that the manhole surcharged and wastewater rose up out of the channel, cover the bench, and later return to normal flow conditions, leaving sediment behind. So in that case, is capacity concern in this area? Do you get a lot of I&I during rain events? In addition to the previous slide, there are some other things we like to consider. What is the speed of flow? Is there anything blocking it? If the flow is always slow in this area, have you, the agency, noticed issues with hydrogen sulfide? Are you doing anything about it? Is there a smart cover? If so, why did you choose this location? Who gets notified of the alarms? How are they notified? Maybe we'll even ask you to trigger the alarm for us to make sure it works. And if we're looking at a hotspot manhole, personally, I like to know how often it is cleaned and inspected. I think all of us here on this webinar know that there can be lots of reasons a manhole or pipe is on a hotspot list. So if it's related to capacity, I might want to ask if you've thought about installing a flow monitor or upsizing the pipes in that area. If it's a hotspot due to roots, do you have a root control program? Is it mechanical or chemical? If the issue is fog or wipes, have you done public outreach? Like German mentioned, door hangers, flyers, an information booth at the local farmers market. Or is the issue a specific facility like a daycare? If so, have you talked with that facility, taken your own enforcement? Like I said, I'm looking for questions to ask you, because hopefully these are already things you've thought about. But if not, hopefully our questions will give you some food for thought and ideas on additional steps that you could be taking. No system is perfect. And in short, the real question is, what is this agency? What are you doing to try to improve, prevent, or mitigate issues? All right, let's take a look at some actual photos from real inspections. So starting with the photo on the left, what do you notice? Well, hopefully you can see there's some rust around the manhole rim and staining inside of the barrel. Like I mentioned, staining in the barrel can be indicative of infiltration or water getting into the manhole. And if you look a little closer, you might also notice an almost milky substance in the channel. That would be fog. So if I saw this in the field, which I did, I would be asking, what is upstream of this location that could be the source of the fog? Which means that if you saw this in the field, I would hope you would be asking yourself that same question. Where is this fog coming from? What can we do about it? All right, photo on the right. We can see the rusted steps, which is a safety issue. Gaps between the risers and the chimney, somewhere water could enter the manhole. The surface of the concrete is rough, which could indicate a hydrogen sulfide deteriorating the manhole. And of course, there's some cockroaches crawling around the cone and barrel. All right, now occasionally you will see something like our photo on the left where it is obvious that a manhole needs to be repaired or replaced. I think all of you here on this presentation know that this manhole liner was either not installed properly to begin with, or it's old enough that it is now falling off the sides of the manhole. Using a liner can be a great rehabilitation option, but it has to be installed properly in order to be effective. So if you have manholes in your system that look like this, please schedule them for rehab, please. For our photo on the right, those are roots growing into the barrel, and while they're relatively fine at this moment in time, they should be dealt with now because as they continue to grow, they will cause further damage to the manhole. I know this, you know this, do something about it. All right, moving on to lift stations. Here are some things we might see. Well, regular wear and tear, loose wires, or fog and debris in the wet well could indicate that there might be a maintenance issue. Concrete that's worn away and is now pitted or has exposed aggregate could indicate there's a hydrogen sulfide issue and rehabilitation needs to be done. Rusted steps or metal components might also require rehabilitation. And last but not least, if a lift station is having spills during wet weather events, that could be a capacity problem. Either the wet well isn't large enough to hold the flow the agency is receiving during a storm event, or the system is receiving too much I&I. We've even seen wet wells housed inside of a building where there's toilet paper on the grates or watermarks up above the catwalk, indicating that at some point in time, the wastewater in the wet well rose all the way to those watermarks or up above the grates, which would again be a capacity issue. So just like with the manholes, these observations that we make in the field helped us prompt questions to ask you. And since I'm already sharing what we look for, here are some other things we consider. Is the lift station fenced in? If not, do you have any problems with vandalism? We'll probably ask to see your logbook. So if you tell us that you do daily or weekly lift station inspections, I hope the logbook matches what you told me. I might also want to see the manhole just before the lift station so I can see what the flow looks like coming in. Is there any grease in the channel? What about an on-site generator? What is your fuel level policy? Can you measure it for me? Does the level match what you just said your policy is? Is there an emergency sign in view with the public so somebody could call if they saw a problem? Does the sign have a phone number they can contact? Does it include the lift station name so they can identify where they are? Does the agency have visible or audible alarms at the lift station? Or perhaps SCADA? I will let you in on a secret. One of German's and my favorite things to do is to ask you, the agency, to set off your high wet well alarm for us so that we can verify that whatever you say should happen actually happens. So if you tell us it sets off an audible alarm, we listen for the audible alarm. If you tell us you should be receiving a phone call, we wait for the phone call and have you put it on speaker. Most of the time, everything works as planned, but we have had several occasions where the agency never got the call or the light was broken, or there was some other issue. So if you're not already testing your alarm systems, I would recommend that because we will ask you about them. All right. You all know what a wet well looks like. The wet well on the left has a significant amount of fog, debris, and trash buildup. In this case, I would want to ask how often this agency is cleaning their wet wells and how big a problem debris is within their system in general. In the photo on the right, you can see there's quite a bit of rust on the metal components and a noticeable fog mat, but not as horrific as our other photo. All right, for our photo on the left, this is an orange safety grate. Not every agency has these and they aren't required per the SSS WDR, but they are a great safety feature to make sure nobody accidentally falls into the wet well when the lid is open. So we appreciate seeing them. And remember how I mentioned the wet well is sometimes inside a building and there's grates or catwalks over the top? Well, that's what we have on the right. And as you can see in the close-up photo, there is toilet paper and gunk hanging on the grates. So in this case, the wastewater rose up over the top of those grates at some point and left this behind. So I think you can guess this, but if I saw this, I'm definitely asking about capacity. All right, dry wells, I don't have too much to say about these photos. You can see the cobwebs and dirt, but does anybody notice something wrong with the photo on the right? Well, if you look closely at German, you might catch that the weight for one of the valves has broken off and is sitting in the bottom of the dry well. The agency did not know this had happened or when it had happened, which we did not live hearing, but we were able to point it out so they could get it fixed. All right, you might be wondering how we handle your fog program, or should I say your sewer pipe blockage control program. The answer is that we inspect your inspectors. And what German and I typically like to do is ask your agency's fog inspector to walk us through their normal grease interceptor or grease trap inspection process from start to finish. So that lets us see what they're looking for, what records they check, whether they inspect the restaurant itself or review kitchen best management practices, or maybe they only look at the grease interceptor. Hopefully they measure the fog and solids in each chamber. We don't love the eyeball method. And we like to ask if they follow the 25% solids limit and if this restaurant that we're looking at would pass based on what they see. And if the restaurant's not in compliance, what would be their next steps? Do they perform a follow-up inspection or issue a notice of violation? Really, it's an opportunity for you to show us how thorough and conscientious you are. I imagine most of us know that grease interceptors are gross. The photo here on the left, and so the first chamber in a grease interceptor. And what do you notice looking at this photo? Well, the thing that immediately grabs my attention is the blue-green plastic glove. So if the kitchen is using proper BMPs, like grates over their floor drains, you should never have a plastic glove in the grease interceptor. So if I saw this and your fog inspector saw this, hopefully they would be asking about kitchen BMPs because I would be asking about kitchen BMPs. The photo on the right is of the sample box. The water looks a lot cleaner, which means the grease interceptor is working. However, you'll notice how bumpy and eroded the walls of the chamber are. This restaurant is likely going to need to rehabilitate their grease interceptor. All right, a couple more photos. Obviously, the left shows the baffle wall dividing two chambers of the grease interceptor. You can see how the left-hand side of the baffle wall is much cleaner than the right-hand side. Again, this is a good sign that the grease interceptor is doing its job. And on the right is a fog inspector measuring the solids. All right. Manholes, lift stations, and grease interceptors make up most of our collection system inspections, but that being said, we wanted to touch on a few other locations that we like to look at in the field. The first one being aerial crossings. Unlike buried pipes, we can see if there are any active leaks, if there's staining on the pipe that might indicate a leak, sags in the line, and so forth. Sometimes these pipes will have a secondary encasement to ensure they don't leak, but not always. We look for wear and tear, rust, or issues with the supports. And sometimes we see something we see pretty often is plant growth overtaking the pipe. The photo that we have here is of an aerial crossing in a wash. So while it was dry at the time of the inspection, it could be filled with water during a storm event. I want you to take a moment to look at the photo and see if you can identify any issues. In this case, there was no secondary containment or encasement. There's corrosion and deterioration that you can kind of see in the lower right-hand corner of the photo. And a blue coupler was covering a hole that needed to be properly repaired. We also like to see repeat or recent spill locations because it allows us to see where the spill would have flowed, ask you about your spill response and recovery efforts, and how you plan to prevent a similar spill from occurring in the future. The photo I have here is a spill location where the manhole is at a higher elevation than the storm drain, so the overflow went straight from the manhole to the storm drain. And if I remember correctly, the agency was not exactly positive where that storm drain led, which is not ideal. All right, next slide. Now, there's not always a lot to see, but sometimes we'll like to visit capital improvement project locations. And this is mostly because it gives you, the agency, an opportunity to talk about why you've selected this project and how it will improve your system. And it allows us to ask about the project timeline, how you'll bypass the location while working on the project, and ask whether your contractors have been trained on the agency's spill emergency response plan. And hint, hint, there is a correct answer. If you have a contractor working on your collection system, per the SSS WDR, they need to be trained on your spill emergency response plan. All right. Finally, I want to go over some common violations that we see. First off, just about every agency has some sort of reporting, reporting violations, usually related to no spill reports being submitted late or never submitted, or spill reports not being submitted or certified in time. Secondly, spills, any spill that has the potential to discharge to surface waters of the state, or any spill that does discharge directly or indirectly to waters of the state, is prohibited, and that is a violation. We also tend to see SSMP violations. Again, agencies need to be performing an audit of their SSMP every 3 years and updating it every 6 years. It's pretty common for agencies to have missed an audit or update or submitted it late. And a big part of the SSMP is the sewer pipe blockage control program. As I mentioned, this was formerly the FOG program. So if your agency has issues with FOG or with wipes, you really ought to have a sewer pipe blockage control program. But remember that if you decide you don't need one, you need to justify within your SSMP why you do not need one. Cleaning and inspections. This one is so important because if you are not looking at your system and you are not maintaining it, you are going to have problems. Now, the SSS WDRs require regular cleaning and visual inspections. We can't be prescriptive, as the SSS WDRs don't state how often these need to occur. But depending on the size of the agency, cleaning should be taking place on a 3 to 6 year cycle. That's sort of the industry standard. So that's typically what we like to see. And CCTV should really be every 5 to 7 years. If it's a very large system, we have seen 10-year cycles for CCTV. But I'll admit that even that makes us a little bit nervous. A lot can change in 10 years. Again, those are just guidelines, and not falling within these timeframes is not a violation as long as you do have a regular schedule that you stick to. But we will often note this as an area of concern if we're seeing agencies with longer cleaning or inspection frequencies, especially if there are other issues with the system. Lastly, training. I know I already mentioned this, but both the agency staff and any contractors working on your collection system should be trained on your spill emergency response plan. We also tend to see a lack of training on spill volume estimation. And now I will pass it back to Brian for our key takeaways.
All right, thank you, Amy and German. Yeah, so just very briefly here, basically, yes, hopefully what you take away from this is that the sanitary sewer system WDR provisions are enforceable. And while, and I know that many of you are very interested in specifically with the sewer system management plans. Hopefully I covered this pretty broadly, but the intent is there that those specific provisions that are required in the order as they relate to the SSMP are enforceable. And the way that they're enforceable is either directly through some of the mechanisms that I discussed, through an investigative order, through informally through the NOV and progressive enforcement strategy, or they're indirectly. And I talked about those 11 administrative civil liabilities that can use essentially non-compliance with those provisions that specifically relate to your planning and subsections thereof, and how those impacted potential or actual spills. So again, what we want to see out there, and I think this is more of a takeaway from the end of my presentation and Jamie and German's presentations, but don't just have a consultant write these SSMPs for you. They need to be implemented. You need to show your water board inspectors, not just through your results, but when we get out there and we start auditing and getting into the depths of your program, that you're actually implementing it. The intent of that plan is not for us, it's for you. So think like a regulator. If you see something that looks like an issue, ask yourself what steps or what actions you can take to mitigate that, prevent that issue. Hopefully you got some tips out of the staff's presentations here, but we're going to go ahead and end our presentation here.
Wow, that was really great content. Thank you so much, Brian, Jamie, and German. I wrote down a bunch of questions as you were going in the beginning, and you pretty much answered them all. But we have some questions from the group that we'd like to get into. And I'm going to start with one about timing. And I've heard this situation from a few different people, so I don't think it's entirely unique. So the question is, what happens if CWIX and the state lookup tool and your previous 2006 order document deadlines have discrepancies? For example, documentation from a 2006 order plus the state lookup state that the updated SSMP is due in August. However, CWIX states it was due in May. So what should an agency do in that situation?
The question you might want to hold for Division of Water Qualities group to maybe answer some of those questions from an enforcement perspective. And I know I only touched on progressive enforcement and the mechanisms behind the water quality enforcement policy that dictates how penalties are developed. But we look at I talked about the cleanup and cooperation element. If you are demonstrating to us that you're doing everything you can to clean up on your end, the data side, that you can demonstrate that you've attempted to get into compliance, and this appears to be a CWIX issue or something that's somewhat out of your control. It's the situation. We have discretion. These are not mandatory minimum penalty type of cases. There's discretion there for whether we even bring a formal enforcement action. So I would like to think that, on behalf of most of the regional boards, that we're pretty careful in the enforcement that we bring, and we think it's warranted when we bring it because of the progressive enforcement policies we have. But the question may be better suited for maybe some in a FRUS group to answer on that.
Great, thanks. Next question. What if an agency has multiple districts and has a plan where they inspect all of the lines every 5 years, but might inspect one district at a time? So in year 1, 2, we might inspect them all, but in years 3 through 5, we might not inspect that system at all. So they're asking, would that be a flag for an inspection from enforcement?
I'll take a first crack at it, and I'm definitely would open the floor to both of my engineers. But you know, it's not a sort of one criteria that puts you on these lists. And again, we're not necessarily trying to only hone in on who we think are the worst of the systems. Obviously, you know, you're going to see inspections of those systems that have multi-million gallon spills, but as it relates to how you're describing your O&M plan or your cleaning frequency or your inspection frequency as it's entered into an annual report or, you know, a published SSMP, it's not a one criteria fit. If we identify something that's flagged, it's because the plan is either unclear or, as the example I demonstrated with the city of Santa Monica, for example, that the plan doesn't meet the reality. It doesn't fit what's actually being done in the field. So, and again, everything with Santa Monica that was publicly available information. So it was very easy for us to look at board meeting minutes and what was presented to, I think, the city's council, et cetera, as far as how their CIP was being implemented. But what was in the SSMP that again was publicly available is this sort of risk mapping and risk associated planning that wasn't really what was in practice out there. So, you know, if you're demonstrating to us that your program fits because you have multiple districts and you kind of do this in a very, you know, regimented way, I think that, you know, again, it's probably going to turn up in how it's described in your plan. And it may not necessarily be something that's flagged in that way. So, Jamie, German, any additional comments there?
I think you covered it pretty well, but I agree if in this situation, if you explain to us we're responsible for multiple agencies, this is how we kind of rotate through. That's not a problem for us as long as you're kind of, again, doing what you say you are. So if you say you're on a 5-year schedule and you inspected in 2015 and then again in 2020 and then again in 2025, that is fantastic. Love to see it. That works for us. If you tell us you're inspecting it every 5 years and you inspect it in 2015 and then you don't inspect it again until 2023, that's where we start to have concerns, is when you aren't doing what you say you're doing. So in that case, if you're following the guidelines that you're setting for yourself, as long as they're kind of reasonable, which a 5-year inspection frequency is pretty reasonable, we would be satisfied with that.
Good. We'll do one more question and then we'll transition to the next part. So this question is, many collection system managers want to know what tips they can get to be proactive ahead of a water board compliance inspection, beyond just completing the collection system questionnaire. Are there any recommended best practices to help prepare and perhaps satisfy inspectors looking at compliance review of agency online info to help stay off the radar or be successful if an inspection may occur?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question, right? I think the reality is that as much as you all don't want us to come to you, we're looking for off-ramps to not have to necessarily put boots on the ground at every one of these facilities or every one of these agencies. The more publicly available and clear planning that you can describe, you know, I know that in the past, like I think it was Los Angeles County Sanitation District, they used to offer a lot more publicly available internal audits through the audit process that were available on their website. That helped us understand what were the problems that the system is dealing with and how are they correcting those actions. And while we did ultimately inspect, I think it was District 5 down there, if you look back at that inspection report, it's probably 10 plus years old now. It really actually identified and highlighted some of those best practices and what we feel is should or is now industry standard out there. So we want to see proactivity. We want to see that you're, doing everything within your means to address infrastructure that I think we've had problems with other agencies telling us that there's no way to address. So examples, force main maintenance, siphon maintenance, things that we've had agency tell us there's just no practical way to do that. There are other agencies out there. There are other neighbors out there that you have that are doing things about that, whether it's through risk management or in situ investigations, whether it's through invasive investigations. There are different ways of managing potential problems. How are you addressing climate change? Do you have a realistic plan for doing that? Or, are you just trying to demonstrate to us that big storms don't come through your particular area? That's not going to work out well for you when you have that big storm in your area all at once that is expected under some of these changing climate conditions. So the more information we have up front, the better. I understand that's always problematic to put more information out there publicly, but that cooperative piece is really important. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I think the more information agencies put out there, the better. The vast majority of our agencies do an amazing job of collecting and transporting sewage every day, and it's a good story to tell. Thank you so much. That was a super informative set of presentations. Really appreciate it. We're going to transition to hear about compliance clarifications from your counterparts in the SSS WDR department. So for those of you who typed in questions, just keep in mind there are written responses. So I'll introduce our next speaker. Afrouz Farsimidon is a professional civil engineer with over 17 years experience in the transportation and water quality sector. For the past 8 years, Afrouz has served as a senior engineer at the State Water Resources Control Board, overseeing the development and implementation of numerous statewide water quality permits. Afrouz manages the implementation of the reissued statewide sanitary sewer systems general order. Also, we have Hong Yan Hui, who is a staff water resource control engineer working under Afrouz. Han Yang is the project lead for the team developing the sanitary sewer system boundary map submission portal. Thank you so much for talking to us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve, for introducing Hong and I. I'm gonna share my screen now. Okay. Today, I will try to clarify some of the order requirements that we have received questions on. Mainly, I will explain how to generate system performance analysis graphs in CVEX and attach them to your annual report. A note on the sewer system management plan and audit report due dates, the purpose of the SSMP change log, and one small clarification on spill reporting. Section 5.11 of the Sanitary Sewer Systems Order requires enrollees to submit 2 running 10-year system performance analysis graphs as part of their annual report. One graph is to show the total spill volume per year per category, and the second graph showing the total number of spills per year per category for the past 10 years. One clarification that is important to make is that the link provided in section 5.11 of the order is not the correct link for generating performance graphs. That link takes you to the collection system operational report. Originally, we thought that would be a good place for enrollees to generate their system performance analysis graphs, but then our developers came up with an easy way to generate the graphs with a click of a button on the annual report screen, which I will show you how in the next few slides. Once the enrollee logs into CVEX and clicks on the annual report link, this screen comes up. On top of the screen, you can see the Generate System Performance Graph button, which I have put a red boundary around it. Once you click this button, it generates the required graphs. It's that easy. And you will see these graphs. Graph 1 shows the number, total spill volume per year per category. And graph 2 shows the total number of spills per year per category. Below graphs 1 and 2 are other graphs showing counts and volumes of spill per year for individual spill categories. These graphs are not required to be submitted, but are generated to provide a better scale of the volume and number of spills per year for your system. The next step would be to print the graphs and attach them to your annual report, which is as easy as generating the graphs themselves. You click on the print button and you can print your graphs in PDF. You have to just make sure that you change the page orientation to landscape. Then you save the graphs on your computer and attach them to your annual report under the attachment tab. On the Sanitary Sewer Order Program website, under the General Order Compliance Tools section, we have posted a guidance document for submitting annual report. In that document, we have provided step-by-step instructions for completing the annual report, including the steps for generating the graphs and attaching them to your annual report. We also have other useful videos and guidance documents on our program website, and I have provided a link to our website on this slide. And the red arrow here points you to where the annual report guidance document is located. Moving on to a few clarifications regarding the SSMP submittal. I want to emphasize that SSMP due dates are fixed dates that continue from the original due dates established in the 2006 order. The due dates were based on the population served on that time. If a system's population has changed, the SSMP due dates stay the same, they don't change. SSMPs must be approved by the agency's governing entity before that they can be uploaded and certified in CVEX. As previous panelists mentioned, sometimes it takes time to get the approval, so please make sure to allow enough time for the approval process before the due dates. We have received requests from some agencies to extend the due date because they are waiting for their board approval, and unfortunately, we can't grant an extension, and your submission will show as late submittal in CVEX. If your agency has multiple sewer systems with different due dates, you can prepare all the SSMPs at the same time and have them approved by the governing entity, but make sure that you submit each SSMP before its a specific due date. SSMP changelog. SSMP is a living document that must be updated as changes to the system become necessary. The purpose of the changelog is for the enrollee to keep track of their SSMP changes between the updates. The changelog must be kept on the enrollee's system, and appropriate staff need to know the location of the changelog and have access to it. The changelog must be attached to the updated SSMP that is being certified in CVIX. If the SSMP is too large, the enrollee has the option of providing a link to the updated SSMP on their website. SSMPs are publicly available on the Agency Operation Performance Report, which I have provided a link here. At the bottom of this slide, it shows where the public can see their the sewer system management plan. In this case, the system has provided a URL link, which is shown here. You can also see the due dates, the next due dates for SSMP plan submittals. Please note that after the SSMP is certified, the uploaded version cannot be changed. In some instances, you can contact the Sanitary Sewer Order Help Desk and request the report be unlocked so you can withdraw and resubmit it. But it's not that like for every situation. One example is if after certification, you realize that you have uploaded the wrong document. You can provide a justification to us and we will see if we can unlock the report. For spill reporting, I don't have much except that please make sure that the reported volume of spill recovered is less than the total volume of spill. Do not include the volume of washdown water or water that is already in the environment when you are calculating the volume of spill recovered. This concludes my presentation. I thank all of you for listening, and I'm available to answer any questions you have. Please make sure that your LRO contact information is up to date in CVIX. As you heard earlier, you may miss important notifications if you don't have correct contact information in CVIX. Here you can see a link to our website and a link where you can subscribe to our email list to receive notification, as well as our help desk email address. This email address is the fastest way for you to get answers to your questions because either one of my staff or myself, we continually check this inbox and respond to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Afrooz. Good to know. So that email address is the best way to reach out with questions.
Yes.
Great. I'd like to repeat the question we asked the Office of Enforcement earlier about conflicting deadlines. And it's a long question. You can view it in the answered Q&A section, but I'll repeat it. What happens if CWIX and the state lookup tool and your previous 2006 order document deadlines have discrepancies? And this example is documentation from the 2006 order plus the state lookup tool state that the updated SSMP was due in August. However, CWIX states it was due in May. So this agencies reach out to the regional board without a response. But do you have some advice for that scenario?
I put a response in the chat, but also I will repeat it that please contact sanitary sewer at waterboards.ca.gov. That's our help desk address. And we've had that issue before, but I think we resolved it. So it might be something new.
Okay.
It was a
Thank you for that. I've got another question. Volume recovered must be less than amount spilled, in air quotes. It could be the same amount, but would it be more accurate to say must not exceed the spill amount?
I think it will be really difficult to recover every drop of spill, but you can say that it shouldn't exceed.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Good. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions at this point. Um, so thank you so much, Afruz and Hong Yan. That was great. We really appreciate your participation in our monthly data review meetings. And for those of you that aren't aware of those, the Clean Water Summit partners meet with the State Water Board monthly to talk about issues with CWICs or how we can clarify any misunderstandings or mysteries. And it's a productive little meeting. So we appreciate that.
Frank is gonna have a short demo of the boundary maps. I forgot to mention that.
Oh, okay, great. Take it away.
Thank you, Steve.
There we go. I think you might be muted. There you go.
There we go. So just needed to open that up to get it going. Hi, I'm Hong, and as mentioned, I'm the project lead and that's been heading the development of the submittal portal. So let's head right into it. I wanted to start off by first bringing a kind of truncated summary of what the order requires with respect to the service area boundary map. So lead off with it's going to be geospatial data of the service area boundary. And I want to emphasize that that's a jurisdictional boundary. It's not a utility map, that's made available in a different portion of the order, but that's not required to be submitted to us. And that's required by Order Section 5.14. You can designate a consultant to help you to submit the boundary map if that's not your area of expertise. We've also been sure to include the option that you can use Google Earth files, which are a little more user-friendly if that's amenable. And but ultimately it does need to be certified by a legally responsible official. This requirement for the boundary map, it will need to be updated as part of the annual report submission if it's changed from the original submission. So if any changes do occur in your jurisdictional boundary, then we do ask that you update that as part of your annual reporting requirements. And then there is this additional requirement to include the location of wastewater treatment facilities that treat the system waste and only if they're within the service area boundary. Finally, it has to comply with the specifications that were posted onto the Sanitary Sewer Systems Program website. And those are more technical specifications. And that can be a lot. So we've done our best to develop a portal that's really simple and straightforward. We've received questions about that application being available within SeaWix, and I do want to bring out that it's not going to necessarily be a module within SeaWix. It is standalone because it is going to be a GIS-based platform. It has a separate login page, but it will use your SeaWix credentials, your username and password combination to do the login. So just wanted to give you a bit of a preview before we head into our demo later. Here we look at the upcoming due dates that hopefully everyone can be aware of. For continuing enrollees, the boundary map is due starting July 1st of this year and no later than December 31st of this year. For new enrollees, then it's not going to be due any earlier than July 1st. And we'll be asking that you're sending that to us within 12 months of the application for enrollment approval date, whichever comes later. To reiterate, if any updates to your certified submittal are necessary, please complete those with the same cycle that your annual report is done at. That'll be April 1st of every year. And just to underline this, that we are going to hit our target of having the portal and the associated guidance available on July 1st. Moving into the boundary map specifications, again, it's a jurisdictional boundary. It must be in a GIS shapefile or a Google Earth KML, KMZ format. Only one boundary per file. And we do ask that you not include the wastewater treatment plant locations in the upload. Again, the order is really only soliciting those jurisdictional boundaries, not the utility maps. Please exclude as well any areas that are not within the agency's jurisdiction. We did also incorporate some built-in error checking for the more technical specifications of one boundary per file or the shape type. So it will reject some files if you do happen to accidentally include the wastewater treatment plant locations. So just to try and help speed things along for everyone. And then further into the specifications, the wastewater treatment plant locations do still have to be identified. In order to facilitate that, we found that SeaWix does house some existing data for the wastewater treatment plant locations. We're going to be mapping those into the web portal, and enrollees will be guided through a step-by-step process just to validate their correctness. And you'll also be guided to if there are any issues with geolocating those locations, then you'll be advised to contact our help desk, and I'll help you through figuring that out and how to amend that data in SeaWix. The feature is going to really be based on your annual reports. So please do go back to your annual reports and try and make sure that they're submitted in a timely manner before July 1st, ideally, so you can really hit the ground running. And I think that should lead us into our demo. So let's pop on over there. So here's our loading page. And as you can see, you can enter in your SeaWix username and password combination in order to log in. And on the main landing page, you'll see that there are some helpful buttons at the top that they will persist throughout your user experience. Here you'll see that your username is going to show up. Please do make sure that it's yours and it's not somebody else's. And then if you click on this drop-down menu, you'll be able to see all of the sewer systems that are associated with your account. You'll notice that there's a difference here between an uploader and a certifier role. Those are just our internal tags for how we're designating a data submitter versus a legally responsible official. And they have different permissions for each of those. So a data submitter will not be able to certify a system, but a certifier, a legally responsible official, will have full access to the system. So here we are guided into the first step of the process where we're asked to upload a file. Let's just put in this one. You can see that error checking is being conducted, and it does take a moment to think, but ultimately you'll see that your shape is going to be shown on the map, and you have the option to either submit that or return to the previous page if you want to upload a different file. So say we want to use a different file instead, and that's totally doable. Once you hit submit, if everything goes well, then your boundary will hit this a successful upload page. You'll then be asked to verify your wastewater treatment plant locations that are associated with this shape. So let's head on back to the start over page first, because maybe we want to certify the boundary first. I'll note on this in just after we get through that process. So in order to go back to the main menu, we come here, select the same sewer system that we were just working with, and now instead we're now able to hit the certification. This should be very familiar language at this point to you, so hopefully we make it easy. You'll notice that here it's not yet certified, and it's really as simple as a click of a button that you can then check that checkbox and certify it. And that should reflect immediately. Now that you've been certified, or the boundary has been certified, you'll see that the same flow process to verify the wastewater treatment plant locations comes up. We can pop on over into that. As you can see, the hypothetical Demo South CS account does not have wastewater treatment plants that treat that flow. And so it's not located inside, and no further action is required. I want to showcase a different scenario and our testing that we've performed so far. So here is another hypothetical sewer shed for that we've been testing with using Millbrae City's collection system record. And we're going to hit next here to skip ahead to the wastewater treatment plant location process. As you can see, there's going to be at least two different points here. One that's inside and one that's outside. Only the inside boundary is required to be interacted with by the order. So let me try and zoom out so that I can see this page. So apologies for that. And can have some display issues with resolution sometimes still. Very much still under development. But so you're asked to go through one by one and select each case and decide whether it acknowledge that that is a wastewater treatment plant that does indeed treat your sewer collection system's waste. You can then submit, or you can cancel out of this workflow. For this demo, we'll submit, and we're then asked to send this as confirmation. This has been successfully updated in the status, but oh, I can't click it yet. But if you are a legally responsible official, you'll then be allowed to go on and certify it. And when we move on to there, you'll see that you do have the option. Only that confirmed point is going to show up here. The not within boundary is no longer going to show up. And then you can go ahead and decide whether or not you want to certify that or hold off until later. And that takes us to the end of our process. Pretty simple and straightforward, as I should hope.
Well done, Hung Yan. That was a great demonstration. Really nice slides. Thank you so much. In the interest of time, I'm going to turn it over to Spencer to close us out.
Sorry, Spencer, before I just want to add something quick that I know CASA went through the process of asking agencies to submit their boundary maps. I want to emphasize that this is a different effort. Even if you submitted boundary maps to CASA, you have to go ahead and submit through this portal again for compliance with the sanitary sewer order. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Fruz. And yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. So really quickly, what I want to do is I just want to quickly mention the effort that the Clean Water Summit partners have done working with the State Water Board and with Ridge Crested to develop some training videos. I just briefly want to share where on the Water Board website you can find many of these. So if you go to the Water Board website, I'm sure many of you have visited this website a bunch of times, and Afruz, I know you have. So if you go here under the Sanitary Sewer Systems General Order and you scroll to the General Order Compliance Tools, you will find here a series of videos, training videos, guidance documents, other things. And there are more videos currently being developed. So that's something that I just wanted to share. And I also wanted to just bring that up. As Steve mentioned, we are hosting a data review group meeting on a monthly basis to talk about CWIX issues, talk about these training videos, and pretty much any other topics that come up. So if you would like to join those, please send me an email. We would be happy to have you. And to fully close us out, I will throw to Debbie.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Mackey. I'm with the Central Valley Clean Water Association. And on behalf of the Summit partners, which includes CASA, BACWA, Clean Water SoCal, CWEA, and Civiqua, I would really like to thank you and everyone for attending today. Just to let you know, today's webinar will be posted probably by the middle of next week on CASA's website. That's casaweb.org under the Resources and Speakers Presentation section. And besides these webinars, don't forget the other resources that have been developed by our associations and the water boards to assist you, such as what Spencer just showed you, BACWA's guidance videos. CWA has a lot of information on their website too. And also, as Afruz told you, there's a lot of tools that are out there, such as the lookup tool and other training or guidance documents that are developed to help you with compliance. As a reminder, key compliance dates are coming up for medium-sized agencies, those that serve populations. And remember, this has to do with the original orders, but those that serve populations between 100,000 and 10,000 people. They need to certify their updated SSMPs by August 2nd. And then our very smallest systems, those that are less than 2,500, their audits are due on August 2nd as well. And then the two smaller size systems are will have their SSMP updates due next year, one in May and the other one in August. And then just a final reminder, as you heard before, the sanitary sewer boundary maps for all existing enrollees are to be submitted by December 31st, but don't wait till the last day. I think that's it. And if you're a new enrollee or you had to re-enroll late, your dates are going to be different. So make sure to watch out for that. And finally, if you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to Spencer, Mary, Steve, or myself, or CWEA. We can help you. And as the water board said, they have a contact us. We really want you to succeed in this effort. And finally, I'd like to thank our planning group for developing and coordinating this webinar. But most importantly, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise and their experiences and making this a successful webinar. So we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.